the next step would be to start to paint. That's the fun part, at least in my estimation. But let me get palette paper here. What I always do when I start is I paint the background first. That's where I always start. I'm not saying that's the only way to do it, but that's kind of my technique. And so make sure you have a good source, because you really need to spend 50% of your time looking at the source like a scientist does, and to understand the shapes, the forms, the colors, and everything like that. A lot of the students that are going to have issues is because they don't look and they just start painting, and they get to a point they're like, oh, it doesn't look good. And because they look at their photo and they go, oh, it doesn't look anything like that, because they didn't look, you know. And so you have to, it'd be like copying a sentence, you know. You're going to get the sentence wrong unless you're verbatim looking at each word in the sentence and stuff. And so I printed out 2 copies here. One is a value. This is just black and white. And the reason I did that is so you can see the shadows. A lot of the students neglect the shadows. I could have made this a little bit more dramatic as well. But be sure when you're painting to get dark enough in your shapes. Because if you don't have those dark shadows, it's just going to look flat and uninteresting. The shadows are kind of like the bass in a song. And so if you don't have that bass, it's just not as interesting. And so be sure to make sure you get your elements or your shapes and your objects dark enough so that it renders the space. It creates that plastic space that you can see. I'm going to keep that image there. For the background here, I have kind of a peachy tone. It's okay if you wanted to go for that. I'm going to do more of a kind of a grayscale background, like one of these 2 here. Just to give it a little more sophistication. That's just my interpretation. And so if you wanted to do the peachy tone, that's fine. It's up to you. But I'm going to do the grayscale. And so I'm going to get my ultramarine blue. And if you have questions, feel free to jump in at any time if you don't see what I'm doing. And my burnt umber. This one's older, the little chunks are falling off. With the oil paint, you don't need that much. If you're used to acrylic paints, if you think about it, with a tube of acrylic paint, it's quite, large. What is this? This is 4 fluid ounces, 118 milliliters. And then the standard size is 21 milliliters for oil paint. And the reason that is because the oil paint has a much better covering ability. And so you only need, a pearl amount of both colors to begin with. And so that's one of the difficult things when students move from oil to acrylic. They just don't know that, one covers better than the other. Usually the acrylic doesn't cover very well. I need white, so I'm going to squeeze out white. So right now I'm just going to go in for the background. I think I want to add a little bit of a warmth to it. And you can say, what do you mean by adding warmth? I know that when I mix my blue and my brown, my ultramarine blue and my burnt umber together, it's going to kind of look steely, or it's going to have kind of either a chocolatey kind of look or kind of a bluish gray kind of a look to it. And so that's fine, I think, in my shadows. But one trick is to use your yellow ochre, and that's that golden yellow color. It's actually one of the oldest pigments that humans have used. Some like 25,000, 30,000 years humans have been using yellow ochre. But anyway, off the historical thing, I like to put a little bit of warmth because to have that cool versus warm contrast is more visually appealing when you have opposites. And so I'm going to squeeze a little bit of this out as well. When we watched the painter, when I showed you the painter, the Yarnell, Jerry Yarnell, and then, or if you've watched Bob Ross, he has a ton. They both will have a lot of their colors squeezed out. Right now, I'm just going to focus on the background, so these are the only colors that I'm going to use. Paintbrush. I'm just going to use a bright brush, and so this is a bright 12, and so that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to probably use a little bit of my medium just to make it slather a little bit. With these cups, they're kind of like drug or like prescription drug canisters. You have to kind of push down and turn at the same time. And so if you can't get your oil open, that's usually a reason. Also, you get a lot of the oil kind of sticks here. It's kind of gummy. I don't know if you can see that. But you can always, at the end of your session, clean it off a little bit, and that'll help you out. Now my fingers are all sticky. So, okay, so the mixture that you would use for the background, I'm gonna add a little bit of water to this I usually keep a paper towel close to me to blot my brush so I don't have too much water on it. And then from there, what I'm gonna do is just mix the blue and the brown together. I'll do it down here. Ideally, you wanna mix away from your clean puddles. You know, I have that blue and that brown there. And so as you can see, I'm mixing further over because I just don't want, I may want to go back to those colors. And so if I just mix those together, it may be, you know, it may be color that I don't want. And so it's kind of wasteful. And so that's why I tend to work away from it. So right now it's kind of a dark color. I'm going to put a little bit of white into it just so y'all can see that this real nice kind of gray tone is going to happen here. I don't know if you can see that, but it created a nice little gray tone there with what I have. I'll put it over here too to see. But anyway, so now I'm just going to paint in here. Hopefully you can see. And so I'm just going to take a little bit of this dark, and I tend to work the edges first. Be sure your canvas is going to have a little bit of a lip to it. It has a little bit of a curved area right here. Go ahead and make sure you paint kind of around that lip. You don't have to paint the full edge, just a little bit on that curve. And that will, when it's framed, it won't look like you forgot to paint an area. And so I always recommend that the students go to the edge. I may want this darker. When I'm painting my background, I tend to do little X strokes. The students like to refer to it as butterfly strokes. I'm changing to the bright brush just because it's more of an area, so I'm gonna just add a little bit more here. Add a little bit of oil to it, a little bit of water. I think I want to make it a little bit darker. So I'm gonna make this a little bit darker on this side here. I'll lift it up here in 1 second so you can see. So that's kind of how I start. I start on the edge and I just start taking the color from one side to the other. I'm not saying that's the only way to do it, but that's kind of how I'm doing it. Or that's how I do it. It's like reading a book, I guess. I always start on the left-hand side and work my way back. As you're working this color, and you can see, hopefully, I'm making these little X strokes, these butterfly strokes. And it just kind of helps the paint kind of to get into the weave of the canvas. The canvas has a little bit of a texture. And if you just use your brush going back and forth or up and down like that, sometimes it doesn't get into that little texture of the canvas. And so that's why it's good just to have a little bit of motion movement to your brush stroke, and it will get down into the areas. Now this may be too dark here, but I'm not panicking because I know I'm going to add a lot of white to it. Think of that model technique that the Yarnell guy showed us in the video. I know I'm going to add a lot of white to it. And so this is really dark right now. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip my brush into a little bit of the yellow ochre here. And I'm going to do a little bit of white as well. And the reason I want to do that is I want to create kind of a illuminated quality to this. Add a little bit more of the brown. And basically it's to your liking. So you can say, well, how did you know to do that? It's just with experience, and also, just experiment. If you think something's too light or too dark, just change it. And so, just see what happens. It's paint. And so the worst thing that can happen is you just have to let it dry and then you paint over it. The only time that you really can't paint over it is if you just get it too thick, and then it's really difficult to paint over it. And so what you have to use is kind of your palette knife and scrape the paint away to get back to a flatter surface. And then you can go back into it. So, but anyway, I'm gonna work this for a little bit here. And a lot of the students will panic when they get next to their shapes. If I paint a little bit into it, it's not that big of a deal. Try not to get too much water. Right there, I got a little bit too much water in that one little spot. But just add some more paint and it should, cover up. And so it's a kind of an accordion technique is what we're working here. And you can see I'm just dipping in. I kind of dip to one side of the brush. I don't just glob the paint on. The term I use is I rake the paint up into my brush. And so what I'm doing, let me move this so you can see. what I'm doing is you can see there's paint on one side and there isn't paint on the other. So what I'm doing is I'm taking my brush and I'm kind of pulling the paint into that one side of my brush. This is just a technique that really helps when you're doing the little butterfly strokes. And let me just paint around here. And then you're going to have these areas where you have these strong transitions where you can see it, this one kind of bold area, and you really want it to create more of a gradation, or if you can say ombre, if you want to use that term. A lot of the students know what that means. And so what you do is you just kind of work those little X strokes, those little butterfly strokes, and you create a blended look. This is that modeled effect that the artist did on the video I showed. And at times, it's just really light touch, very similar to like touching the top of a baby's head, a newborn baby's head, meaning just light touch. You want to just barely kind of hit the surface of it to kind of blend the paint together. I have a glare from the light, so that's why I keep trying to move this so I can see it. I can see now. I know I'm blocking your view, but I can see that I messed up a little bit there, or at least I had some areas that I need to blend a little bit more. Now, ultimately, I kind of like the blended kind of textural kind of look. I don't know if you can see that. This is that vignette effect that happens where you have it dark on the outside and it gets lighter as it goes to the shapes. It's something that humans tend to like, and so that's why painters put it in their compositions. Anyway, at times you're going to have to blend it more, and so that's one reason in the kit from the bookstore you have the fan brush. And you could always come in and soften a lot of that brushy work. I kind of like the way it looks right now, but if you wanted it to be more smoother transition with less brushy work, painterly or expressive quality, you could use this brush without any paint on it. I will show you here in a second. But let me get it kind of established, and then we'll go from there. So you can see I'm going back and forth between the gray mixture from the brown and the blue, and then the ochre and the white as it gets closer to the object. So let me just try to knock this out real fast. Well, it's a good amount of area that I have to fill in. So never just using one color. I'm using a good mixture of several things. When you have little tight areas like this, sometimes it needs just a little bit more water in your brush, just so that the paint can kind of slide for you down in those little gaps that kind of happen in different shapes as you go around them. I can tell I need to get this lighter, but I'm just kind of going around it right now. And then you can see finishing it off. This is that term where you just kind of use your little brush strokes, kind of finish all this stuff down. I'm going to add a little bit more white as I get around this, because I know the stem is going to be dark, so that's why I'm adding more white to it, to the background. And if it gets too watery, just add more white paint to it, and that will absorb a lot of the excess moisture that happens. Usually I have music going while I'm painting, so if anybody wants to sing a song, Craig, you want to sing for us, or? Be sure to get that.
If I knew how to.
No.
I only play guitar.
I tend to whistle a lot as I'm working as well. If the paint isn't right here, the paint wasn't smearing on for me, and that's because I just didn't have enough of the medium or the water into it. So if it feels like peanut butter, real sticky and it's not moving, just add a little bit of water and a little bit of the medium, and it will start to slide for you. I'm getting this darker again, but I'm not worrying about that because I'm going to come back in with the white. I just want to kind of get it over here. I think I might blend that. Let's use some white. I'm going to stand up a little bit so I have a glare. It's making it hard to see. Going back in with a little bit more of the warmth, so keeping it cool on the edge and warmer as it gets closer to the objects, to the pairs. You can leave it real brushy if you want. It's up to you. I'm changing brushes because I'm going to go around my pear here on the other one. So in this case, to get around my shape, what I'm doing is just a little bit of water, a little bit of medium, and I'm kind of taking the brush and kind of working it. I don't know if you can see where the pear, the stem of the pear is right here, but I want to be kind of careful, so I'm kind of taking the brush and shimmying it back and forth, and then kind of getting it close to the shape, kind of work around and then pull away. That's kind of how I do that. Add a little bit more white. And you'll be able to create a real nice blended effect. And that mottled effect is real nice because it allows you to have interest in the background that would just normally just be a plain color or plain shape. I know a lot of poppy images have just like pink in the background or a bright yellow or something like that. It's nice to have kind of a changing mottled kind of effect. And every once in a while I have to pick it up because I can't see what's happening. It's unfortunate to keep getting older and your eyes don't always work as well. I need a camera behind me. Let me do it this way. Make sure if you get paint on your hand, you can see here I'm pushing the brush out. I'm using the side here to kind of balance my hand as I go around the pear. Hopefully you can see that. A little bit of a right there, and then kind of brush it away. That's what I want to do. You get these nice atmospheric transitions is what we're trying to do. Sorry, Nicole is trying to jump in. Okay. I don't know, can y'all see what's happening? Yes, no, maybe so. And so I kind of like a little bit of texture. So what I'm doing with this bright brush is I'm kind of tapping it just to create a little bit of a texture, and every once in a while kind of fluffing it down. And that will kind of give a little bit of a visual texture to the overall background. And then every once in a while, right here, I don't like how this little area right here, I have kind of a harsh line right there. And so what I'm going to do is just take my brush and kind of work that down a little bit and try to blend it a little bit more. You can see that little harsh line. So I just take my brush, get it at an angle that I can see. I'm going to add a little bit of white paint to it. And actually I'm going to take a little bit of the yellow too, yellow ochre. And let me just lighten this area too a little bit. And so I'm just tapping into here. And you just are smearing it around is basically what you want to do until you get it to a look that you like. Is what we ultimately want. We want it to look good to your eyes. Right here I want to make it a little bit lighter underneath there. You can see a little bit of that. I kind of softened that transition a little bit more there. And so this is painterly, meaning that sometimes people want it to look like glass. I kind of like a little more brush stroke, but it's kind of your choice if you want it to have a little bit more brushiness to it. But it's kind of nice to, this is that impressionist technique basically. I'm going to get the ground here. A little too much blue. Let me get back to some brown. And just, you can see what I'm doing right here. I'm trying to blend, and so I'm just softly like touching a baby's head. So you kind of get it on, and then you're kind of like, you need to blend it, and so you just lightly kind of just touch the surface to blend it. You got to have soft hands to be kind of a good painter. The kind of joke in the art, in art schools is that if you have heavy hands, go to sculpture and go to throw ceramics and things like that. Because sculpture, you're more kind of hands-on and really moving stuff. With painting, it's more kind of a softer, kind of touch to get the effects that you want it to achieve. And so, sitting back here, what I want to do is just kind of soften it a little bit. It's gotten a little too brushy for me. And so what I'm gonna do is take this this fan brush, and I'm gonna try to fan this. Let me see. You'll be able to see when I post it. I just can't see because of the glare. Let me just soften this just a little bit. And soften this. So just lightly kind of touching, the surface, just to blend all that kind of together. Anyway, that's kind of what I have right now. Beep, beep, beep. Leslie, I still haven't impressed you. I will, by the end of the night, I will do something that will impress you. I'm hoping. And so I'm just gonna real fast try to do the rest of the background here real fast. So bear with me as I try to knock this out. This isn't Bob Ross, but one of the tricks that Bob Ross would do is actually, he would actually put down a liquid white background first before he actually started putting his colors on. And so if you ever watched Bob Ross paint on PBS or Netflix, I think it's on Netflix as well, the color really starts to blend, and the backgrounds in the sky look just amazing. And that's because he has a layer of liquid white, which, I mean, it's not like, ooh, a trick or anything like that. It's just a lot of artists, you know, have done that over the years. With the Impressionist technique, people tend to do that less. They kind of let the color do its thing. But and sometimes when you're painting, you think it looks good, and then you step back and you look at it and you're like, oh, I need to adjust that, or I need to blend that. And so just be aware of that. It's not, you know, we watch TV shows of these painters, and they're people that have been painting the same kind of thing for, you know, 10, 20, 30 years. And I'm adding more blue here, so I want to get a little bit of a bluer tone to it. And so they're just so used to making whatever it is that they're painting, drawing, or whatever it is. And so you can't put yourself up against them because they've been doing it for years. It'd be like, you know, Tiger Woods. I mean, he started, you know, playing golf when he was, you know, 3, 4 years old. And so, you know, it was something that he did almost the majority of part of his life. And so this is just a learned skill. Painting is a learned skill. Yes, I mean, to make yourself, you know, a great painter, sometimes it takes natural ability, but anybody can make successful paintings if they just put the time and effort into it. And so there's that dark that I've kind of put around on that other side. And now I'm just going to work in the white in the ochre, just to kind of get that around and blend it. So oil, just to kind of make it slurry. More white, more of that gray mixture. I don't know how much of this y'all are able to visually see, but open. You can see here, I know my color, I have a big strong yellow blob there, and that's fine. I know I'm mixing other colors into it. Think of it, the analogy I give, it's like an accordion. You go back and forth with your colors until you achieve what exactly you want. And so the painting term is you work the surface. And so you keep just kind of adding the color and blending it until you get it to where you want. It's not one magical stroke and then it's done. And so it's going to take a little bit of time. So I'm just being very careful as I go around this stem here. And now I'm just going to work this lighter into it here. Sometimes you do something by accident and it looks great, and those are those happy accidents that, you know, really make the painting look good. Add some more white. I know I'm blocking y'all, but just bear with me. A little too warm right there. I'm going to add a little bit of blue and the brown just to warm it, to cool it down a little bit, temperature-wise, to gray it out a little bit more. The white paint is your friend in the sense that, you know, when you get colors that you're not happy with, just add some more white paint and it'll just tend to blend everything together. Sometimes you can have too much, of course, but for the most part, it's what's going to kind of unify everything visually. And really trust your eye. So as you're working this surface, at times you're going to be like, oh, I don't like that, and you try something, and then all of a sudden, your eye will kind of engage and go, ooh, I like that, and go with it. That's what you really are trying to develop, is that eye-hand coordination, and really trust your eye as you're working. So getting a little bit darker down here where it meets the ground. Now working that around. Whoop. I took out a little bit of my stem there, but it'll be fine. I was using the back of my brush to kind of bring back the shape that I lost there. So what I'm doing is wrapping the paper towel around my finger, and I want to kind of wipe out add a little bit of water to it, and you should be able to wipe out in an area that you didn't want it to get into, for the most part. Okay. Just got to blend some of this and we should be good. And I can move on to the table. Oops, sorry. So you could say, well, you're not looking at your image. You told me to look at 50% of the time to your image. Well, in my case, I know I want to alter the background. When I'm really going to start looking at it is when I paint the fruit and then the shadows that are on the table. That's kind of the important stuff. So right now, the background, I'm just kind of making it look like something that I like, that goes with it. So you have a lot of freedom with the background, but with the actual objects, the fruit or whatever you've chosen to paint, that's where you really want to spend your time in making sure you have it exactly the way you want it. I'm gonna get the fan brush again, and I'm just gonna fan this down. Let's see if I can hold it in the angle that y'all can see. So I'm just gonna lightly kind of take the brush and just lightly kind of work the surface a little bit. Again, I'm fighting the glare. That's one thing you might hear artists, oh, I need northern light to paint. It's just because sometimes with the oil paint, it creates glares and everything like that. And if you have a certain soft light source, it makes it real nice to see what you're actually painting. And so that is why you might have heard that. Actually, I got a big glare there. And see, now I can see it. You sit down to get back on the camera. This right here, I can see I need to transition that. You may take too much away, and so you can always go back in and add more. I think I'm gonna add a little bit of white in this one little spot here, a little bit more yellow. So I'm just dabbing on a little white and yellow, and so I'm just want to add a little bit of light here. Sometimes you get to a point and the paint just keeps getting to a mud, meaning that it's so wet and everything is so wet that there's not much more you can do. You just have to add more, more and more paint to kind of get it the way that you want it to look. And so when it's at that point, you just got to stop, because there's really nothing else you can do, because the paint is just going to keep smearing together. Let's see. I want that to be a little bit more. I'm being picky, which I probably shouldn't be right now, but I just want to show you how I would do it. Kind of like that dark around the outside. Like how that looks, so I'm going to soften this right here. So what I'm doing is just doing this real kind of soft stroke right here. Just kind of soft, modeling this kind of brushy technique here, just to get it to where the brushwork looks more consistent with what the other stuff that I have. It's not too bad. Sometimes, like right there, I didn't want it to be that light, but I tipped into that dark area. And so what you need to do, which I didn't do, is make sure you clean off your brush. So I was going really light in this one area here. And I wanted just to kind of soften this just a little bit. And so when I tapped up there, it got a little bit of that light tone mixed in with that. So I'm just gonna bring a little bit of that dark back down here, just a little bit. Ding dong. Okay. That's not too bad. It's okay for right now. But anyway, so that's kind of like what I have for the background. So it kind of looks like those, when you go to a professional photographer, they put those kind of backdrops behind you. And so, see, my obsessive compulsive nature wants me to keep working this surface until I get it exactly the way that I want it, but I'll stop there. So now what I'm going to do is go to the table. That's the next point I want to go to. And so what I'm going to do is, once again, use the dark tones. If I had a burnt sienna, I probably want to use the burnt sienna, which is more of a reddish brown, but I'm just going to use more of the umber. I could put a little bit of red into it if I wanted to, which I will. Let's just put a little cadmium into it, just to give it a little bit of an orangey quality. And so this is the brown and the blue with a little bit of the ochre and a little bit of the red, just to kind of orange it up a little bit. That'll give it kind of more of a woodsier kind of look. So that's kind of the mixture there. And I want to find my line where the tabletop is, and so that's what I want to try to do. And value-wise, you can see that you want it darker in the back and make it lighter as it comes forward. That's kind of the trick to make something look three-dimensional. So darker in the back and lighter as it comes forward. So that's what I'm going to do here. At times when you put this in, you're going to say, whoa, what color did I just put down there? But I'm not going to panic because this is real reddish right now, because I'm going to work back some other color into it. And so right now it's very red, but I think this will work. So I'm just going to work this down here. I'm going to take more of the brown and some of the blue mixture. Put that in. And I need a little bit more of the ultramarine too. As you paint, you're going to get a lot of paint on your hands. So just every once in a while, make sure you clean your hands so you don't get paint where you don't want it to be. So where those two, where the table and the ground come together, just kind of work that area and kind of create a nice line. I'll show you here in a second what I've done. Make this dark and I'm going to make this lighter. So I am looking at my source too, so I just want to see where I am. Might be a little bit too much lavender on it. Let me just add a little bit more of the yellow to bring it back a little bit. That'll probably work better. And then a lot of the white as it comes forward. I'm working this rather quickly, so bear with me. You can take your time as you're doing this. So I know there's a nice shadow down here, so I'm gonna kind of work those shadows in. And notice I'm not using black. So the black paint is only reserved for areas that you really need super dark. For the most part, your mixed complements should be able to get everything that you need. And so that's what we want to focus on if you can. And at times, it's going to take 1 or 2 times before the painting gets to where you want it. So this is just how you would start. So So I'm just gonna get more of this dark blue and this dark brown, a little bit of that red. And I'm gonna cut it in here. Out of my oil. I try not to pour too much of the oil out, just a little bit at a time. At the home where I work mostly, I keep it in a little cup, a little plastic, it's a yogurt, actually a glass yogurt container. And just keep the lid sealed. I didn't actually take that all the way down. So I'm just gonna make this real dark here. I'm gonna lighten it. I always go dark first because you always can lighten it. You'll see this in a second. I'm referencing my photo just a little bit to see where those kind of dark, super dark shadows are. It's like telling a story. You're gonna have to make it dramatic for people really to like it. And so that's kind of what I'm doing here, is just making it, the shadows very dramatic so that they really stand out. Going to now lighten a lot of this. If you need to go away or anything and come back, that's fine. I'm just gonna keep painting. It's really dark back here. So I'm referencing my value photo is what I'm looking at, just FYI. So that's what I'm kind of looking at. You see me looking up every once in a while. Okay, now I'm gonna start lightening it. I'm gonna grab some of the white and just start working it into the surface. It's much lighter back here, so let me just get this off here. It's a little too blue for me. I'll adjust that. So you're just trusting your eye. Let your eye tell you what it needs to be as you're making your little painting. Let's see what I got here. When you're doing the tabletop, you kind of want to make sure you're doing kind of finishing off with kind of broad strokes. It's not finished yet, but I'm just trying to show you. So you can see how my strokes are kind of going this way. It kind of convinces the eye that that's the table. And so that's kind of what I'm doing there when you see me doing these long kind of brushy strokes here and working my way up into the shadows. That's why a lot of you in the grayscale, you were having some issues because you didn't paint we weren't painting outside of the cone sphere and its shadow. And so when you're actually painting, for the most part, you're, working ground into the shadow areas. And so it's going to be much easier to adjust shapes is what I'm trying to get to there. So let me see what I have here. And so that's what I have right now. So I want to start adding some more highlights in areas so that I can adjust the table so it has a little bit more convincing space. I'm not trying to overwhelm my shadows. I'm just trying to soften some areas. Probably right there. Well, no, that actually transitions in there. So just going back and forth. If you get a color you don't like, just kind of adjust it. I'm going to amp up the white as it comes forward here. And the yellow. The warmth and the light will make it look like it's coming closer to the viewer. Let me work this one little area right here. I'm going to clean off my brush just a little bit and clean off my hands just a little bit. And let me just bring this down. I didn't bring my background all the way down. I need to bring that down. Get that a little darker, come on now. Sometimes the paint will fight you, but just be nice to it. It's like a 2-year-old. Can't really force it, you just gotta convince it to do what you want. And then let me get a super dark to get that line again. And I need to do the same thing here. Let's see. Okay, let's see what I have. I still need to lighten some areas there. I need to lighten this area here behind the peach a little bit. It's too much. Let me get a little bit of here. So at this point, I could fuss with the tabletop a little bit more, but I'm just going to go on to the pears. Get that kind of worked in a little bit. It'd be nice if I didn't have this glare. I don't know how, I may adjust the tabletop just a little bit more. Let me see here. When you're painting, you just got to really rely on your eyes and let your eyes really tell you what's working, what's not working. And it's a layering technique, and so you will definitely be painting layers. I think I want to gray that out a little bit more. Get a little bit more of a grayish tinge there. What I'm doing right now is looking at the shadows. Sorry, as I'm blocking you. Oops. I'm looking at my source here. Transitioning it just a little bit more. I don't like this one side here. Let me see what I need to do. Let me get a little bit of a dark. And work that down a little bit. Where's the shadow? The shadow's more on the outside. When it's wet, be careful as you're flipping it around, because you might smear it or get it on areas that you don't want it to be. I like that, but I'm gonna take that just a little bit. I have like a little bit of a, I don't know if it's eraser or paint scum right there. And then, get at my source. Just get this here a little bit. Trying to lighten this one little area here. And just, it's all wet, so it's all gonna just kind of smear together. And that's what I want it to do. And then I'm gonna get the excess paint off this brush. So I'm taking a paper towel and getting the excess paint off, and then I'm just gonna lightly come back the other way with this darker tone. Just to transition it a little bit. It's a little harsh. And then let me just do a little bit more of a shadow right here. It goes right to there. Fades out a little bit. It's a little bit darker underneath it. And, well, we'll just leave it there for now. I'm gonna attack the pears next. Whoops. So that's not the only way to do it, but it's just the way that I normally do it. I just kind of get it all roughed in. Just like in the video when we watched when he was painting the still life of the wine bottle and the grapes and the cheese. This is kind of just working it all in. And then once it dries, I can go back in and make adjustments as needed. You can see I got a lot of paint on my hand. For the pears, I'm gonna squeeze out some green and some more yellow tones.